Hello everyone, welcome back to another F1 Fantasy video ahead of the Australian Grand Prix. Now, before we get into the video, make sure to stay updated with any news that I have for F1 Fantasy on my Twitter. Make sure to like and subscribe, and also I will be live streaming just after FP3 before qualifying to go over the final changes and final updates for F1 Fantasy before qualifying. And then for anyone who wants to know my league position, here it is now on the screen. I am in the top 42k in the world at the minute. So let's get straight into the video. So we'll start off this vid by going over the drivers you want to avoid in your team selections. Now, the first two haven't changed since the last few videos, and that of course is the McLaren boys, and we'll talk about Lando Norris first. He is a whopping 23.2 million in the game, and with him being the second most valued driver in F1 Fantasy, you need to be scoring more than 8 points. It's pretty understandable why I'm saying not to touch him, considering there are much better options from 18 million and above for premium drivers, so there's no point in touching Lando Norris until McLaren gets a little better. Same thing for Oscar Piastri, however he's slightly cheaper at 19.4 million, but he's still more expensive than mainly Carlos Sainz, which is a much better pick than Oscar Piastri in the McLaren. So then swiftly on from the McLaren boys, we'll talk about the Mercedes boys and how you don't really want to use them. Lewis Hamilton, it's no secret that his start of the season hasn't been perfect, so he is definitely a no-go, considering Leclerc, Perez are very similar prices compared to him, and same with Russell. He is a cheaper option than the Leclercs, Perez's, Hamiltons, the Verstappens. However, he's just in a Mercedes that does not look that good at the minute, especially when their race pace is this bad. It's just not worth bringing in the Mercedes. Then we move on to the mid-priced drivers, and first off I want to talk about Bearman. The reason is Bearman is still in F1 Fantasy at the minute. However, it has been told that it's very likely that Sainz will be back for Australia, so please do not waste a free transfer bringing in Bearman, as you'll then have to replace him to bring back another driver in, as Bearman and Sainz will not just change and you'll get Sainz in your team, you'll have to re-add Sainz to your team, so be careful not to do that this weekend if Sainz is back. And then we've also got Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin. He obviously crashed in Saudi Arabia, which was not ideal for anyone who had Aston Martin or Lance Stroll like myself. And it really does show he is just too unpredictable to have as a driver, especially around Australia, where we have had 11 DNFs since his comeback on to the F1 calendar since 2022. So 11 DNFs. And Lance Stroll, it's got him crashing out again written all over it. So I would steer clear of Lance Stroll. Then moving on to the cheaper drivers, we'll start off with Daniel Ricciardo at 8.7 million. He only got 0 points in Jeddah. And basically, the problem with VCARB at the minute is their qualifying pace is okay. However, Ricciardo needs to do slightly better than what he's doing. Qualifying, not good enough. And then the race pace just isn't there in that VCARB at the minute. I would steer clear of Daniel Ricciardo. And yes, even though it is Daniel Ricciardo's home race, I don't think he'll be doing any heroics in Australia. And then another cheap driver that you want to steer clear of, which might sound crazy when I say it first, of course, is Nico Hülkenberg at 6.7 million. Now, the reason for this is we have to take his result in Jeddah with a pinch of salt. And this is because without Magnussen's masterclass, Hülkenberg would have had a disastrous race, a disastrous quali. He would have most probably scored around 0 points. It would have not been a good weekend to have Hülkenberg. So it might look like him having 9 points in Jeddah means he is a great option for Australia. However, F1 Fantasy has not changed, where doing well in qualifying in a Haas where your race pace will drop off has not changed, and you should not pick him in your team. And then the final driver to watch out for in Australia is Logan Sargent at 5.9 million. You do not want him in your team. The same sort of reasoning for Lance Stroll. Sargent is just too unpredictable, especially around Australia. Like I've said, 11 DNFs in the last 2 races there. It's just not worth taking the risk with Sargent at a race circuit where there tends to be quite a few DNFs. So with that out of the way, let's have a look at some of the team selections you can pick heading into Australia. Now, the way I'm going to be doing the team selections is I will be showing what I think is the best teams, and then I will be scaling it down, down. So the last team I talk about will be the worst team that you could choose. However, with that said, if it's a team I've talked about in the video, that means it's still a decent team to run going into Australia. So of course we start off with the Perez team like we've done in the last few videos. This team consists of Red Bull, Ferrari, Perez, Pierre Gasly, Magnussen, Albon, and Guan Yu Zhou. Now we'll start off why you would want a driver like Perez. Perez is valued at 22.1 million. He went up $1 million in price value in Jeddah. Now this means in Australia, if he has another good weekend, he could easily price increase by another 0.5, potentially $1 million again, which is great when we're racing to get that Verstappen into the Red Bull Ferrari team. But also when you look at his points, 31 and 31, he's very consistent at the minute, coming second place, second fiddle to Verstappen. However, when you have Red Bull and Ferrari as constructors, having Perez just close enough to Verstappen on the 2 times means that Ferrari do much better than Aston Martin and you score more. Now, the 4 other drivers, like I've said multiple times, it's sort of a roulette wheel with the cheap drivers. However, you can sort of hone in and think about which drivers are going to do better if you're thinking about points-wise or even value-wise. So first off, I picked Pierre Gasly for 7.5 million, and this is because he has had a stinker of a season so far. Ocon seems like the right option for the Alpine. However, Ocon is too expensive, and we've seen what Ocon can do. Gasly can do the same, and at 7.5 million, if he has just one good weekend where he stays out of trouble, does nothing, qualifies last like we want in F1 Fantasy, and then does a few overtakes, coming like 17th or 16th, he'll get a few points and he'll go up 0.5 million. So he is a good option to have in your team at the minute. Again, Kevin Magnussen, unlike his teammate Hulkenberg, he tends to do better in races, which is perfect for F1 Fantasy. We would actually prefer Magnussen to get dropped in Q1 and then do better in the race, getting more points. And we've seen by his points haul that this is exactly what he's been doing, and he's been doing it well. Now, Alex Albon in the Williams, again, their qualifying pace and race pace has been a bit off. However, Albon is a consistent driver who you can rely on to score you a few points every weekend in and out. So he's a better option than the more inconsistent drivers around the same area of price, such as Sargent, Hulkenberg, Bottas. And then our 5th driver pick will be Zhou, and this is because, again, like I've been saying, qualifying bad, race pace quite a lot better. He gets a lot of overtake points. He's been doing it basically ever since he's been in F1, and we've seen what his teammate Bottas does, and it's not good enough really. You want to have Zhou. The only reason we didn't have Zhou last weekend is because he did not take part in qualifying, getting that -5. So that is the first team, and that is the team I would like to run. However, I can't run it this weekend because it would take me 3 transfers. However, the second team, what I'm about to show, is the team I'm going to be running for Australia. So the second team consists of Red Bull and Ferrari and Perez. We have Yuki Tsunoda instead of Zhou Guanyu. By no means a bad team. I think it's slightly worse than the team I just talked about. However, Yuki Tsunoda, if he gets in to the final part of qualifying, then he'll finish at least in the top 12 or 13, and he'll get you 1 to 4 points minimum. I would like to add, I know this didn't happen last race weekend, and it didn't happen in Bahrain either. However, both times he actually got quite unlucky. Of course, in Bahrain, the strategy didn't really work for him, and in Jeddah, he got stuck behind Magnussen, and this won't happen every weekend. And in Australia, it could be the first time where he has a good full weekend, which is good enough for a cheap driver, especially when all of us have so many cheap drivers in our teams. We just want to make sure we don't get any minuses and get a few points and potentially a few value changes through the races. And then finally, with the sort of variation to the Red Bull Ferrari Perez team, we finally have the Leclerc Red Bull Ferrari team, where we change Perez with Leclerc. Now, we saw last weekend he got fastest lap, he came 3rd place. Leclerc is the one who could take the fight to the Red Bulls. So if you wanted a differential and you didn't want to go for Perez, who seems to be the more consistent one, however, Leclerc could still score you more points, such as last weekend where Leclerc actually scored the most points of any driver in Jeddah, this is not a bad team. And of course, it consists of the 4 other drivers I was talking about in my last team selection. Now, moving on to the Verstappen teams. Verstappen teams consist of having, of course, Verstappen, and then Red Bull and Aston Martin. Quick disclaimer, a lot of people are still using VCARB with Red Bull. I highly recommend not using VCARB. Red Bull and VCARB is not a good strategy. VCARB are struggling to get more than 10 constructor points in a weekend, and that is just not good enough. To show you just how bad VCARB are doing as a constructor at the minute, Williams and Haas have scored more points as constructors in F1 Fantasy so far this season. It is going to ruin your team if you use VCARB, and considering you can easily upgrade to Aston Martin, there is no reason not to. So the Aston Martin Red Bull Verstappen team will also consist of the 4 drivers I was talking about in my other teams. The exact same reasons I gave, but this time they're just with Verstappen, Red Bull and Aston Martin. Now the only scary thing about Aston Martin, of course, is having Lance Stroll. However, you've just got to hope that Alonso does very well and carries your team well enough. And the upsides to this team, of course, is having Red Bull as a constructor. They are basically a necessity in F1 Fantasy this season. And then Verstappen, of course, he is the best driver to have in this game, which is the main factor pulling people towards this team. And Aston Martin also is a decent shout. However, if McLaren and Mercedes are better than them, then it can really ruin this team. And then the final variation for the teams you could choose going into Australia is, of course, the Mercedes-Ferrari team. Now, you would keep Verstappen, and when you have Verstappen in your team, you're hoping that he carries hard, getting fastest lap, pole position, the race win. Sometimes it will be better for Verstappen to qualify lower, so then he can also get driver of the day, because if Verstappen gets fastest lap, driver of the day and the win, any team with Verstappen will be the better option. However, this hasn't happened yet this season, and with Verstappen always getting pole, he won't ever do it because there'll always be someone who's had a better race in the rest of the field. However, this team again will consist of Verstappen, Gasly, Zhou, Magnussen, Tsunoda, Mercedes and Ferrari. And again, like I said with Tsunoda, he is interchangeable. And so those are all the team selections going into Australia. So let's have a look at if you should use any chips. Now, the short answer is probably not. However, no negative could be an option. Like I said, 11 DNFs in the last 2 races in Australia. This could be a good race to use it. I'm contemplating using the no negative. I will wait again till FP3 on my live stream to do the no negative if I do. However, because it's not a sprint race weekend, I do not recommend using Limitless, Extra DRS or Autopilot, as you will want to get the most points possible. And like I keep saying, sprint race weekends offer more points available. So in theory, if there's more points available, Limitless and free times will be more effective there. Autopilot also because potentially on a sprint race weekend, Max Verstappen won't win everything. And then again with the wildcard, it is still way too early on in the season. I would recommend using wildcard around halfway through the season. For instance, if Mercedes or McLaren get their act together and can fight the Red Bulls, then you would want to change to not have Ferrari in your team, for instance, or maybe VCARB start doing well, or Aston Martin start doing terribly, and you really need to get on the Red Bull Ferrari team. So yeah, be careful on the wildcard. If you still have it, do not use it yet. And then finally, Final Fix should not be used this weekend, and Final Fix should only be used on occasions such as last weekend with Zhou, where he was going to get a -5 and you needed to do something to change your team to get Zhou out to resolve getting the -5 from Zhou. And unless that happens this weekend, which we will know after FP3 realistically, then I would not touch Final Fix. But anyway, let's have a look at my league. And thank you all so much for joining it. We actually have 3 times the amount of people in this league than I had last year. We have 361 people in this league right now, which is just amazing. And I also want to reiterate to everyone, again, there is a £200 prize pool, £75 for first place, £50 for second place, £30 for third, 25 for fourth, and 20 for fifth, and that will be in Great British pounds paid out. And then finally, what I'm going to bring back for this video is a top 5 shout out in my league, like I used to do. And first off, Monroe of Le Mans, thank you for joining my league. You are top at the minute. You have used Limitless, so we'll see how long you stay there for, but very well done. Congratulations on second place. Fafari, well done on your third place. Keep up the good work. Pesa Racing 3, very well done. You are the final person in my league over 500 points. Very well done. A very good start to the season for you. And then finally, Fantasy Riz God in 5th place. with 488 points. Honourable mentions to Leapers1. He has been in my league the last few seasons, or at least the last season, and he always does well. So well done to all you 5 plus the honourable mention of Leapers1. So anyway, thank you all for watching this video. I hope you took something out of this video that you can use for your F1 Fantasy team selection in Australia, and I hope to see you in my live stream just before qualifying. Thank you very much. Have a good day.